Alright, so what we want to do today, and welcome back to modeling, by the way, but what we want to do today is we're going to go through the processes to create a primitive city. And the assignment today, or for this week, is going to be based on you creating a primitive city like this of your own, with 4 or 5 buildings. I've got 3 here. We're gonna cover how to create these 3 buildings, and you should be able to take the concepts that we talk about today and put them into action in order to create 3 of your own buildings, or I think 4 or 5 of your own buildings based on the project. But what we want to do is a quick review of all the stuff we've covered so far. So we've covered how to zoom in and out using the mouse wheel or Alt and the right mouse button. We've covered how to rotate around your scene using Alt and the left mouse button. And we've covered how to pan across your scene using Alt and the middle mouse button. And those are 3 pretty useful things. We've also talked about how to create the simple objects, these primitive objects here. You can create a sphere, or you can create a cube, or a cylinder, whatever you want to create. And we talked about how just to, click on one of these buttons up here, and you can create these 3 things. Now, you also have the ability to move these objects by clicking on this button. You can move them, right? And we talked about how you normally want to move based on just the arrows. You want to make sure that whenever you're moving an object, you click on an arrow. If you click on the inside of the object, you'll end up doing something like this, where it looks like this cylinder is on top of this skyscraper. But if I rotate around, you'll notice that it's way off. Right? And no matter how many times I do that, it's going to be really hard to get this object to sit on top of my skyscraper exactly where I want it. But if I come through, and we'll grab another object, and I use the arrows, and I just move it with the arrows, right? Then I get a lot more control, and I can end up putting it directly on top of the building a lot easier this way. And I know exactly where it is because I use the arrows. So that's the move tool. The rotate tool, right, it's pretty straightforward. It just rotates the object, which might be more useful if it were something like a cube. Say we wanted this cube to be sitting at a different angle instead, we could do something like that. And then we also have the scale tool, and that just makes objects bigger or smaller. Just pretty straightforward, and we've covered all that. What we may not have covered is that each one of these tools has a hotkey associated with it. So if I want to move this object, I can press W, and I bring up the move tool. If I want to rotate it, I can press E on the keyboard, and it brings up the rotation tool. And if I want to scale it, I can press R on the keyboard and it brings up the scale tool. So we know those 3 things: move, rotate, and scale. There's just a few more things we need to learn before we can actually go into creating this primitive city. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide the city for now. And we'll talk about layers and this channel box editor in a later video. But right now we're just going to look at a single cube, and we're going to try to modify it a little bit until we can get a primitive skyscraper. And I keep saying the word primitive because what we're working on right now is just learning the tools. We're not trying to put every single detail of a skyscraper in, because that would take too long. What I want you to focus on is just getting something that looks relatively like a building. Right? And again, we want you to have at least 4 of these for the project that you have to submit. And at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about the project reflection that's also going to be due this week. And I know we talked about that a little bit in the introduction, but I want to cover it in a little bit more detail. So we start off with this cube, and I want you to notice there are 3 different ways to select different pieces of the cube, I guess. So we start off, you can select the entire cube, and what this is called is an object. So if you come up to select, you can see object mode, and it has a hotkey here which is F8. And you can select the object and move the object around, which is what we've been doing up to this point. But you notice you also have faces, edges, and vertexes. Alright, so I want you to select the face view, and now you can come in and you'll see that every object is made up of faces. Right? The cube happens to have 6, it's like a dice or a D6, it's got 6 sides. You can select any side or any face, and you can now move that face. Right? And you can move just that face out as you have it selected. If you want to select more than one face, then you can just hold down Shift on your keyboard, and you can select more than one face. And you'll notice as we do that, it just moves those faces around. Now, every face in Maya is made up of edges. And you can come up to select and select edges. It has a hotkey of F10. Right? So select the edge. And you can do the same thing with the edges. You can move individual edges, which is helpful, and most modeling is done using just the move, rotate, and scale tool on faces, on edges, and also on vertices. Every edge you'll see is made up of 2 verts, is what we'll call them. Has a vert on either end, and you can select the verts and you can move those also. And you can hold down Shift and you can select multiple verts and you can move them around. What you'll notice is, if we go back to the cube, right, if I select this face and I move it out, it does that. If I select all of the vertices around this face and move it back, it treats it the same as if I had selected the face, because I've selected everything that is attached to the face. Similarly, if I select just all the edges around a face, it works the same way. With edges selected, you can also rotate the edges. You can also rotate faces. And you can also scale faces, and you can also scale edges. Right? So the ability to move, rotate, and scale are pretty much all you need in order to be successful at creating different objects. Right? Different primitive objects anyway. But there's a few more things that we need to know before we can really do anything in detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this cube and I'm going to make a new one. Right? And we notice our cube comes in and it has the 6 faces. Right? And we can modify each one of the 6 faces. But what if we wanted to put like a tower on top of this cube? Right? One way to do it is to create another cube and move it up. Right? And now we've started to make some sort of tower. Right? And this is really primitive modeling. Right, this is as primitive as modeling gets, because we're breaking down every object that we would want to make into just cubes and spheres. Say we wanted a dome on the top, right? And then we could just bring in a sphere, and now we have a dome on the top. Right, and that's really primitive modeling, and that's not what we want to focus on today, but it is a possibility. But what we want to do is actually modify this one cube to be a skyscraper. Now we've looked at moving, rotating, and scaling the faces, the edges, and the vertices, right? But now what I want to do is how to create more faces, edges, and vertices. So there's a couple of ways to do it that are standard. The first way is to come up to Edit Mesh and scroll down to Insert Edge Loop. And if you go to these little boxes over to here to the right, of any tool in Maya, whatever tool it is, if it has a box over here to the right, it means it has options. So what we would do is we would click on the Insert Edge Loop Options, right? And then we have a bunch of different choices here. We can set it relative distance from the edge, equal distance from the edge, or we can make multiple edge loops. Now what's important here is if you create multiple edge loops and you set the number of edge loops to 1, then when you come over to your cube, you have to click on one of the edges. Remember, we're inserting edge loops. So if I click on the faces, it doesn't do anything except tell me I need to click on edges. So if I click on an edge, you'll see what it does using the multiple edge loops and one number of edge loops. It puts an edge loop directly in the center of the edge that I selected. Now this is really useful because what it allows us to do is now we have 4 faces here instead of the 1 face that we had before, right? So we have a little bit more control over the model that we're creating, right? So I can pull these 2 up and now I've made some sort of different structure than if I hadn't put in the edge loops, right? So now we have extra faces. We also have extra edges that we can modify, right? And just do different things than we could have done before. So if we wanted to make this into some sort of a small house, you know, we could just pull this up and now we've got a really generic house look, which we couldn't have if we hadn't put in the extra edge loops, right? Because there's nothing here in the center that we can grab onto to create that point. So you can see how doing edit mesh and insert edge loop could be really useful, right? So we're going to click on it here. And now what we're going to want to do is you can scale this, right? And I just want to scale it out, right? And I'm going to rotate it. What that does is just creates a really funky shape. But the important thing to note is that with every edge loop that you create a new level of detail that you can add to your object. So what I'm going to do is just using simple edge loops, right? I'm going to build a generic looking skyscraper. All right, so I've got this here. I'm going to edit mesh and I'm going to insert edge loop tool options, right? And instead of using just one, I'm going to use 2 edge loops. And I'm going to place them here and I'm going to place 2 here. And you'll notice that when I place them, they're equidistant, right? Maya goes ahead and organizes them to be an equal distance as long as you are inserting multiple edge loops. If I'm inserting them relative distance from edge, then it's only inserting 1 edge loop, but I can move it around, which I don't want to do right now. So I'm going to leave it on multiple edge loops. And now I'm going to select the face, which you remember you can come up to select face, and I'm just going to pull the face up. Right, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to edit mesh. I'm going to insert edge loops. I'm going to grab the face in the middle, and I'm going to move it up. Right, so I'm starting to create a shape that's kind of rising. It still doesn't look much like a skyscraper, right? But I do have extra edges to work with, which is good. But if I want to make an actual skyscraper, I need a little bit more control than that, right? So what I'm going to do is talk about the second way to insert new faces and edge loops that we want to work with. So I'm going to select this top face, and I'm going to come up and I'm going to say Edit Mesh and Extrude. Now Extrude has options also, and we want to make sure that to begin with our divisions are 1. That's the most important thing about extruding right now, is that our divisions are 1. And we're going to apply this. I'm going to go ahead and close the options box, but you'll notice that you have a widget here that includes the scale tool, it includes the move tool, and it includes the rotate tool. You can do all three of those things with the extrude. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on the scale tool to tell Maya that I want to use the extrude scale tool. And then I'm going to grab this middle scale and I'm going to scale it in. And if you see, what it's done is it's pulled a new face off of the old face. Right? And I can pull it up or pull it down, but what I want to do right now is just scale it in. And once I get it scaled in, I want to select off, and I want to come back, and I want to select the face again. And I want to say edit mesh and extrude another time. And now if I pull it straight up, you'll see what I'm doing is I'm starting to create the stair step effect of having some sort of skyscraper. And I'm going to do it again. I'm going to select the top face. I'm going to extrude. I'm going to scale it in. I'm going to extrude a second time, and I'm going to pull it straight up. If I do this a couple of times, I end up getting an effect of some sort of skyscraper. It's pretty ugly. It's pretty plain, but it's there. So the real power of Maya comes when you start combining the insert edge loop and the extrude tool. So I'm going to demonstrate that. I'm going to come in and I'm going to try and create, we'll try and create this skyscraper right here, right? I'll just try and create a second one over here for you. It's got a little bit of detail in it, right? But it's not really that detailed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, I'm going to grab my face on the top and I'm going to pull the face up, right? So that it's pretty even with it. And then I'm going to edit mesh, insert edge loop options, and make sure I'm just inserting one edge loop under multiple edge loops, right? And I'm going to do that on both sides of my skyscraper here, right? So that breaks up my top face into 4 separate faces. I'm going to select one face and hold down Shift and then select a second face. And now I can come up to Edit Mesh and Extrude. I can just pull them both straight up. Alright, I'm going to select off, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to select a second face. And I'm going to Edit Mesh and Extrude. And I just want to scale this face in and pull it up a little bit. Actually, I'm going to pull it up a lot. And then I'm going to Edit Mesh and Extrude again. And now I just want to scale it in. And then Edit Mesh and Extrude and pull it out. And then Edit Mesh and Extrude and scale it in. Edit Mesh, Extrude, pull it out. Right? And you'll notice the difference here is if I just grab the face and I extrude it, if I scale it in and pull it out at the same time, I get these angled sides, which that might be what I want. That might be what I'm going for. But if I extrude once and scale it in, and then extrude a second time and pull it out, then I end up getting this kind of stair step look that I'm going for. I'm going to go ahead and do it one more time so that I at least have some sort of symmetry on this building. Alright, so now I have a skyscraper that looks something like that. It's not as tall, but the principles are all there, right? So once you get into doing that and just inserting some edge loops and extruding off, right, then you can start getting some of these other more intricate shapes. So I'm going to try this one now. I'm going to start off with a cube, make it bigger and move it up. I'm going to select the 2 edges on either side. I'm going to Edit Mesh, Extrude. And now what I need to do is just pull one of them off. And you'll notice, even though I'm pulling the arrow to the left here, this face is doing the exact opposite of what this face does. That's just a way that Maya works, and it's usually pretty beneficial. So I'm going to come through and I'm going to select the 2 faces on either side of these new kind of cubes that I just created. I'm going to edit mesh and extrude again, and I'm going to pull those off. So now I've created this H shape, which you can see here. And I'm going to go ahead and make this kind of triangular dome here. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these three faces. I'm going to do edit mesh. I'm going to extrude those and pull them in. I'm going to edit mesh, extrude, and I'm going to scale them up. And then I'm going to scale them way in together. Right, and what that's doing is that creates kind of this triangular shape on the top. Right, now I want to try to create these domes, and I have to do these individually, so I'm just going to do one of them for sake of the video, because we're already a little bit longer than I normally want these videos to be. But I'm going to extrude, I'm going to pull it up, I'm going to extrude, I'm going to pull it up and scale it in. I'm going to extrude, I'm going to pull it up and scale it in. Extrude, pull it up, and scale it in. And you can see the more extrudes I make, the more the contour gets curved, right? And it starts to look like it's actually creating a sort of a dome effect on the top. It's not exact, but for the purposes of this project, it's good enough, right? So using the tools of edit mesh and insert edge loop and edit mesh and extrude, mixed with the fact that you can select vertices, edges, or faces, and then you can move, rotate, and scale those vertices, edges, and faces. With those things, you should be able to create some primitive looking objects that are similar to skyscrapers, right? If you have any questions about that, you can feel free to email me acarricker7615@stanley.edu. We also do have the open lab on Fridays, and we're probably going to start holding an open lab on Wednesdays after 3:30 until about 5:30 or so. And you can stay until 8 because we do have game night on Wednesdays, so the lab will be open and you can work through it if you need to. The last thing I want to talk about today is the primitive city reflection. I'm just going to pull this over here, and I want you to look at the primitive city reflection. So what I need you to do is to submit a file documenting your process during the primitive city project. And all I want you to do is basically answer these 5 questions that I have. They need to be pretty detailed. I want you to be very descriptive of what you did. And the reason for this is because I need to know that you know what you're doing. If you don't remember what tools you use to create something, it doesn't benefit you to have created it, right? The purpose here is for you to be able to look back and remember all the steps that you did so that you'll retain that information and you can take it forward. So I just need you to describe a step-by-step process you followed to create the city. I want you to include the tools that you used and try to make it kind of a tutorial base that someone else could follow and create the same city or buildings that you did. Any problems that you had, if you had trouble with the extrude tool or the move tool, or if you just couldn't remember where one of the tools was, you know, document that and let me know that you had the trouble with it so that I can address it maybe in a future video, or maybe I can, you know, set up a meeting with you and we can talk about it. If you solved the problems, tell me how you solved it, or, you know, if somebody helped you, you know, just give credit to that. I want you to give a short summary in your own words of what you learned during the process. I know you're going to learn the extrude tool, you're going to learn the insert edge loop tool, but I just want you to give a description in your own words of what you gained from the project itself. And now that you've gone through the process of creating the project, you've ran into problems along the way, you've fixed stuff, I want you to explain what you would do differently if you had to start over. I need this to be in a Word file, and it needs to be due probably whatever night the project is due. It will be due 2 days later. I'm not sure of the exact date right now, but I will post that in Moodle as soon as the project comes available. So if you have any questions, you feel free to email me as always. You can also include screenshots if you need to in the documentation. So grammatical errors are 5 points off, and if you don't answer one of these questions, it's 20 points off immediately. So that's the second half of the project. Remember, the first half of the project is just to do the primitive city submission. And what this is again 4 or 5 different buildings that you've created using the insert edge loop and extrude tools and just moving the faces around to create building looking objects. As always, if you have any questions, let me know, and we will hopefully be grading your project soon. Thanks.